Come celebrate Black History Month with this beginner cookie decorating set. There are 4 cookies and we're doing wet on wet designs to keep it as simple as possible. And as you might have noticed, we're focused on the beauty of Black hairstyles. Now I do have one concession. I really wish that I could include texture in this set. And if you are looking for something like that, I would recommend going and checking out the Graceful Bakers set. That's all about Black women's hair and texture, and she does a great job of displaying that in cookie form. And she is using cookie cutters from the Kinky Culture Cookie Co. For this set though, we're sticking to just the simple cookie cutter and we're sticking to one consistency of icing. You can see I got started with a yellow here and we want really vibrant colors. So we're going to making yellow, red, green, and black. These colors are the colors of Black History Month, 3 of which were included in the Pan-African flag that was created by Marcus Garvey, a Black activist, in 1920. And then a few years later down the road, yellow was added, coming from the Ethiopian flag. Like all of my sets, we are using the primary colors to make these colors. Obviously red, we just used red. Yellow, we just used yellow. And then we're adding... First, we add the food coloring, and then we add a little bit of water at a time, and we mix, mix, mix until we get kind of a hybrid icing. This is a consistency that it's not a line, it's not a flood. If that doesn't mean anything to you, not a problem. We're looking for a 15 to 20 second icing. And so I can run my spatula through it and count to 15 or 20 and the icing will have settled. Now to make the green, color theory here. Pretty simple. We're going to add blue and yellow. I find for every drop of blue, I need to add about 4 drops of yellow. So you're going to see that I am adding 8 drops of yellow, 2 drops blue, and then I'm going to add some water and just mix. I always forget I need to go slow at the beginning, otherwise the water just kind of spits out and it's not fantastic. And then once I get this kind of initial green, I can reassess and say like, do I need more blue? Do I need more yellow? Did it turn out perfectly the first time? It's a mystery whether I decide it's good or not. I do think this one is solid and I think I got the consistency seemingly right. And the real key here is to just mix a lot. By hand, it's pretty hard to over mix your icing, just because royal icing is pretty forgiving when it comes to the mixing of it. And then our last color, black, we're going to come in with some cocoa powder. And this is a trick to not add too much color to your royal icing because it can kind of bleed into one another. I'm at a loss for the word right now, but you're adding too much of that color pigment and then it kind of spreads. So by adding cocoa powder first, one, you do change the flavor of the royal icing. So you definitely want to think through what flavor did I put in my royal icing. I would recommend an orange so that the cocoa really complements that flavor, but you want to add the cocoa powder, add some water because it's going to dry out that icing. And then once you have it pretty well mixed, not to that correct consistency, then you're going to come in with the black so that you're not adding too much of that color. You can see it's still a really thick consistency. I'm going to come in with my black. Unlike with the other gel food colorings, black you want to add more of it. You're not doing like, here's a drop, because it's not going to take you very far. We want to add a little bit more. I probably could have added a little bit less, same with the red. I think both of those colors, I think the black and the red were a little oversaturated. That's the word I'm looking for. You can oversaturate them. And then you just end up with just too much of that color. They weren't too oversaturated, I will tell you that, because if you add too much food coloring, your icing will not dry correctly. But you can also add a little bit too much and the colors kind of bleed into one another. And I definitely saw that with my kind of like squiggle cookie that has all the colors. The colors bled a little bit into each other. But here we go. The icing is great. So we're just going to set up our work surface. Here's all the items that I like to have on hand. You can just be decorating on a piece of paper. But here's the trick to this set. We're going to use tissue paper and we're going to use an edible pen because we're going to outline these silhouetted hairstyles. And I ran into some trouble here, I'm not going to lie, and I show the trouble to you. So first I came in, I have these amazing fine point pens, and I learned this trick from Megan of Downtown Town. I'm so bad with names. I'm so bad. I will put her information in the description below. She's a fantastic cookie decorator. She has an amazing eye. Highly recommend checking out her design. But I learned this trick from her, but for her it was for writing onto cookies. So you outline what you want to do and then you put it on your icing. Well, I thought this will work just fine on a cookie. So I come in, I'm actually breaking it a little bit. I initially tried doing this with that fine point and nothing transferred through the paper. But I came back a little bit later with this thicker pen that I've had for a really long time. Again, all of these are edible markers, and just kind of went with like a heavy hand and pressure, centering this transfer on the center of the cookie and drew on it. And you'll see how amazing. Oh, it didn't really do it. Yeah. It took a lot of effort. So then I thought, what if I flip it? Because I have all of that on one side of the cookie. Maybe I need to be flipping the transfer so I can get that ink transferred better. Maybe that's the issue here. And I will say, learning this trick from Megan on a iced cookie, it worked perfectly. I got those fine tip pens literally from one of her classes. We had a shape there, but it didn't really work. So then I went back to using the fine tip over the heavy marker and just kind of like really digging in and dragging and kind of going over things with a heavier hand than I thought. And you might think, well, why are we even using these kind of stencils, these transfers? And it's because I really wanted to respect the silhouettes. And being obviously a white woman, I wanted to do a better service to these hairstyles that have been given a disservice for literally centuries. So that's why I'm using the stencil. If you feel like you can draw it, go ahead. You will save yourself so much time, because after I drew it, I started using that fine tip to go over it again because I have a faint line but not good enough. So it was a process. You want to start by outlining the stencil with the fine tip, with the heavy marker, and then you want to put it on the cookie and trace it with the fine tip using a very heavy hand, doing a lot of pressure. And then when you take it off, you want to come back with that heavy marker and trace it again. So if you can do this by hand, just sight draw it, please go ahead and do it, because it was the most complicated part. I'm really happy with how things turned out, but you have to do that for all of your cookies. Once all of your cookies are traced out, now that's just the silhouettes, you're going to come in and cut the ends of your icing bags. And so I'm zooming in tight, so you want to get that really flat, cut it, and then I like turning it about 90 degrees, which I was having trouble with these piping bags. I switched to a different piping bag on this set, ones that I've used for a really long time, but I've been using other ones for a while. Anywho, I don't know which ones I like best. These were something. And then I turned it 90 degrees and cut it again. This helps you get much more of a perfect circle. You might notice after you do your first cut and turn it 90 degrees that there's almost like a U in there. So that's why I cut them twice. So we're getting started with these stencils. And what you're going to do is come in with your black and you're going to outline it first. And I actually made a smaller piping bag of just black. I made 2 different piping bags of black. One was bigger for when we do just the straight circle of black, and one was smaller so that I could cut a finer tip on that that piping bag to be able to get the stencil a little bit better outlined, because there's a lot of detail here that frankly I lose throughout all of these cookies, and it's fine, but again, I wanted to do these hairstyles justice and hopefully you can see that in the end. But I also want to make a set that as a beginner you would feel capable of doing. And so doing this wet on wet two-tone color, I think you will be very capable of doing. I also apologize for the angle here. I usually come in with a side angle and was having issues with getting my camera set up. I'm just having issues. So then I'm going in and filling in that stencil. Now you can see that the outline is thick enough. It's not a really fine outline. I can go in and fill in these sections, but I'm kind of going every other lock on this hair. And then I'll come back and fill it in. I'm not just going straight every single lock because I don't want to overflow my outline, which can easily happen. I'm giving my icing like a little bit of time to settle before I come back and do the other sections. I did find that my consistency on this settled pretty much entirely on its own. I didn't really have to come in with a scribe and correct any of these, but what also really helped this was having a smaller piping bag where I could cut the end of it, the tip of it, to be a little bit more precise. And you could cut it even smaller, but I think you would have a tougher time getting that thicker outline to start. You might have to go over it a couple of times, which when you're doing a more intricate design is a little hard to do. So I will be completely honest, after I got this initial piece done, I went and did the other cookies, and then I came back to add in the outline, and I just want to give it that time to set up so that the two colors didn't blend together. There wasn't merging. I could have that very structured silhouette of these locks. So I'm coming in with, you're going to make 3 of each of these silhouette cookies. You're going to make one in green, red, and yellow. And so I'm coming in with a green, I'm outlining it, and then I'm going to go around the hairstyle. And I really wish I had cut a smaller hole in my piping bag or used a smaller piping bag so it was easier for me to control, because then I would keep the detail a little bit more. That would be something I would recommend for you, but it kind of worked out. So I'm going through and I'm trying to very carefully do the outline of this lock hairstyle with the green, and I'm trying not to lose the detail, but honestly anytime I'm going in between these locks, detail is being lost. But if you have the patience, smaller piping bag, smaller hole, and I would probably recommend having 2 piping bags for each color, one that can be bigger and kind of fill in all this empty section outside of the design, and one that can go through and outline the silhouettes of all of these cookies. So I'm going through with the green, still just outlining, trying to go slow. You can see it settled very nicely next to this black, and I really don't have to go in with my scribe unless I'm using my scribe to kind of like clean up that design. And then I'm just going to fill in the rest of the cookie with this green. And I'm obviously going to be careful of not getting too close to the outside edge. I don't want it to overflow. Again, this depends on the consistency that you have. If you ended up with a 15-second consistency, totally fine. Just don't go so close to that edge. Come back with your scribe and scoot that icing to the edge so that you're avoiding overflowing. That's exactly what I'm going to do with my scribe here. I like to do these little circle motions. I feel like I have a little bit more control over where my icing is going, and then I can shove it to the side and shove it right back up so that we're not like overflow. But there's our lock cookie, and there it is in red. Now I had traced all of these other ones already, and I went through that multi-step process of tracing, and now I'm coming in with the afro, and I am using my black icing, and I'm trying to get all of these little details. And the design that I'm sharing with you in the free guide, which you can find down in the link in the description, that's really what I should say, is not going to be as detailed because I lost quite a few of these like beautiful curls with the icing. It was just too detailed, and that's on me. I mean, you can see I'm not doing it. Could a cookier do this level of detail? Of course they could. But we're beginners here, and that's okay. beginners gotta begin somewhere. So we're just outlining it, and I'm going deeper into the design because it gives me a little bit more control over the icing flow. And we're just gonna fill it in with black anyways, so it doesn't super matter. And then once I finish that, I'm gonna start filling it in, again, kind of going every other so that it can settle a little bit, and then I can come back and fill it in. So every other kind of like loop I'm gonna hit with icing, and then I'm gonna come back and fill in the next section. And a little bit around the face I'm just filling in because we have more in this afro than we did on the locks to fill in with black. And so you can take a little bit extra time to be like, oh, I'm filling in this middle section. And if we're using a different icing, there is some technique we could use here to leave the afro with that textured look and that textured feel, but our icing is going to level out, and that is okay. Again, we are beginners. That is why we are doing this set. Now, if you want something that's more advanced, like I said, you can look at Graceful Baker. She has an amazing set, and she uses the cookie cutters from blanking on it. I will include it down below. Kinky Culture Cookie Co. That's what it is. I knew it would come to me. And I do every other, and then I come back and I fill in. I'm just going up along the side right now, and then I'm filling in those ones that I missed. And honestly, by the end, you'll have filled in the entirety of this afro silhouette. And you're just going to take your time. This is definitely a cookie. Now, I have had a little cookie turntable for about 4 years now, but I've been decorating cookies for like 10 to 11 years, and I didn't have one for a really long time. I didn't feel it was necessary, but this is definitely a cookie where it would be a little bit more convenient to have one because it's easier to get into all these kind of like nooks and crannies when you have one. Like with the lock cookie, after I filled in the silhouette, I set it aside to work on other cookies. And then I came back, and again, like with the locks cookies, you are going to do this 3 different times, 3 different colors: yellow, red, and green. And so I'm showing you how to do it on the yellow. We're going to start by outlining the entire cookie. And I'm doing kind of I'm going around a few different times. I think I did that like 3 or 4 times because it creates a really solid edge and it makes it less likely that your icing is going to overflow. And then I'm just very slowly trying to go on every single one of these indents. And again, this is a cookie where having the turntable is nice, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary at all. You could also put your cookies on a piece of paper on your table, or I used to just use parchment paper, or I would use a paper towel, set it down, and turn that parchment paper or that paper towel. It's gonna do the same thing for you. Unless you're on a table that has a tablecloth, and then it might be a little harder. I was exclusively thinking of like a wood or metal table there. So if you have a tablecloth, maybe you can't do that. So I didn't immediately go in and outline the face or fill in the face. I did the neck first, and then I came in, and this is really where I lost some of that design on the bangs, the front of the afro, right around the forehead. And so I'm going to use my scribe to kind of get pieces in there and add a little bit of that dimension back that my icing kind of took away. So I'm using my scribe, which is just, mine's essentially a metal toothpick, and I used a toothpick for years. And you're going to use that to push your icing around, and you can see I got a little black. And this is a good reason to let the black set a little bit so that you can use your scribe to push things around and you're not going to get another color. So I couldn't fix it. I couldn't cover it up. So I'm going to bring in my yellow icing and just do a blob to cover up that black that I got out of space. And then you're just going to fill in the rest of the yellow, or the outside of your afro. And again, for this cookie, that means yellow. And then I'm going to grab my scribe again. This is just my metal toothpick. You can use a toothpick here, and do this kind of circle swooping motion to make sure that my icing goes all the way to that outline edge that we piped on first. and that it evens out perfectly. And you can see there's a little bit of spotting to fix there. And if you want to help your icing set up a little bit more, you can kind of shake your cookie a little bit. But there is our Afro cookie. Next up we have our Afro puffs, which again were outlined before we even cut our icing bags. And again, has a little bit too much detail, but that's okay. We are getting the look and feel of Afro puffs in this silhouette. So you're going to start by outlining the entire Afro puff again. And I will say one important part to have is making sure that you get that crease in the middle, because it'd be really easy to kind of like lose it into a blob. If you get my drift. And it almost looks that way here. I do believe I come back with icing a little bit later and kind of define that crease down the middle and where each Afro puff starts, just because the design is a little close together. And in the free guide, again, you'll find that in the description down below. You'll find a link to get that in the description down below. I include an updated version of what these designs should look like. And so they'll be a little bit easier to trace and to pipe. And so I'm filling in kind of that the edges, and you can see my piping bag is losing its black because I've done quite a few cookies at this point, and so I need to take some time to get the icing down to the end again. And I'm just filling in those sharp edges. These are sharper than on the Afro or on the locks for these Afro puffs, and then you can fill in that center. And this is again where you can see the importance of kind of keeping that middle part on the front and then that straight around the face. And like with the other two designs, I set this one aside and let it dry a little before I came in with the additional icing for the edge. And again, we're doing a yellow version of this, a red version, and a green version. And I'm just kind of seeing if I can get a little bit more edges on this Afro puff, and then I'm coming in with the red and I'm outlining the cookie. Again, we let it dry a little bit. I feel like the best way to do this is to, fill in all of your Afro puffs and then come in with the color so that you can work on or do one of the locks, do an Afro, do Afro puffs, and then come back with your color. So maybe you're doing like one design at a time, and then I'm going through, I think I did that 3 times, outlining that cookie so I had a really solid edge, and I'm going through with the easiest part first, just that outline of the face, and then I'm doing my best to keep these edges of these cute Afro puffs so that they are still defined and we're not just making like a barbell, which it almost looks like here. Again, emphasizing the importance of that middle part that we have for the Afro puffs. So going through with the red, being very careful to make sure that we're still containing those edges. And you can see I've lost that middle part. I tried to get it, but we lost that shape on the top. It will be corrected. Don't you worry. I will show you how to correct it in case it happens to you as well. And again, just going through those outside edges so that we can get that Afro puff shape, and then filling in the rest of the cookie. There's a lot more empty space here. And so I started with the face and then I went above in between that part. And then I'm going to fill in the rest of this empty space here. So you don't have to be so precise with it because we're filling in empty space. And again, I'm getting this up right to that edge because I have about 3 wraparounds of this. And I can also tell that my the hole in my piping bag, the cut tip on my piping bag, is a lot smaller. You can see that by how the icing's kind of falling out of it. It's in a very small line, and so I can mess around with getting closer to the edge here. Just one note about how much icing is used on a cookie. It can feel like a lot of icing. But you want to use a lot of icing so that you're not getting weird indents in your icing. You're getting a very flat surface. So one of the things that helps us with that is using our scribe to kind of help flatten out that icing. And this is where the glare on my cookie is actually very helpful, because it can show you more of where I'm having like ridges in the cookie that can be spread out, that could be evened out with the icing. This is also, once I kind of get all the icing to the edges, this is where I can come in and fix any of the issues I may have made with my red on this cookie. So particularly, I want to get a little bit of that middle part. So I'm just using my scribe a teensy bit to get that middle part in there, and then really define the two afro puffs so that I have that middle part. It's very clear this is the top of the head and the shape that we are wanting to move forward with. So if you lose it when you are decorating, you can correct it with your scribe. And then that'll bring us to our last cookie. You may notice there's a line on this cookie. Your cookie does not need to have that. This was a leftover cookie from, I had baked a lot for a class I was going to do. Not everyone was at the class. It was kind of like an open thing. So I didn't know how many I was going to need, and I put these in the freezer to use for the future. So disregard that line altogether. You are coming in with your black, your bigger black, not your fine, detailed silhouette black, and you are outlining your cookie. Again, you might want to go around it a few times. I am going around at least twice, because I know that there's going to be a lot of design on this cookie. This is our Black History Month squiggle cookie. So I'm outlining it a few times with this black, still going, and then I'm going to fill it in with the black. And I don't have to be as precise or as generous with how much icing I am putting on this one, because again, we're going to come in with some other colors. So I just want to get a layer on. I will say you still want it to be an even layer, but it doesn't have to be as much icing. One really big lesson that it took me a few years to learn is that you don't need to be scared of how much icing there is. I have overdone it on icing before. I made a blueberry pie once and the icing was thicker than the cookie, but 90% of the time, that is not going to happen. You do want to just create an even layer, and I'm coming in with my scribe. When you add cocoa powder to your royal icing, it can make it a slightly different consistency. You might notice how this icing is moving. It's just a little different. So if you experience that yourself, don't worry. It's totally normal. Everything's going to dry and taste great. But the cocoa powder is just, it changes the viscosity a little bit. So I'm pushing my icing to the edge because I want to make sure that I have that even flat base. And you can see there's quite a few ridges. I actually lift my cookie up because it was so hard for me to get it to the edge because the viscosity of this icing was just different. And it was sliding around too much, so you might find that as well. You can see it is not a flat, even base yet. And my favorite way to correct that is what I call the washing machine method. Just kind of shaking my cookie. You'll see a lot of other cookiers lift up their cookie and shake it. I hate touching the sides of my cookie because I so often will kind of fat finger it and touch the icing as well. And there goes my edge. You can see again using the light that it's not completely flat. But we are going for a much more flat base, and when you have the cocoa powder in your icing, it's just going to be harder. So here's where the fun comes in. You're going to start by adding a red squiggle to the center. That was the center of every single one of my cookies. And then I'm coming in with a different color and adding another squiggle off of that red, kind of going a different direction. And they don't have to be the same length, they don't have to be the same shape. We're just looking for similar design family. So next is yellow. My yellow icing was just a little different for some reason, and so I'm going a little bit slower with it out of the bag. Now, after I did that red and the green, I added the yellow on top. I can go back to adding yellow. I can add yellow to the side. We're just trying to make sure that we're not putting, red directly next to red too much or green directly next to green too much. And we're adding some shape in. And we're also trying to make sure that we're not putting the red in the middle and then all the other squiggles are like sun rays off of it. Patterns are not my forte. They are very much not. This was definitely inspired by a plethora of patterns that I saw in connection to Black History Month, and are likely an ode to some of the amazing patterns that have come out of Africa. And you want to just keep adding these squiggles, alternating colors to fill in the space. There's no right or wrong to it. You just want to keep that kind of squiggle shape. You want to try and not have the colors directly next to each other. You want to try not having them going all the same direction. And you can have them be longer, you can have them be shorter. A lot of mine are like an MW shape with like a little, they're like a signature of an M, right? But they don't have to be. You can decide that everything's going to be a W and go that way. But we're just filling in slowly, adding colors. And again, all of these colors have a meaning and a representation for Black History Month. And they all are coming from a specific point of view. Like I said, this flag, the flag that had 3 of the original colors, the Pan-African flag, was by Marcus Garvey, and that included red, black, and green. And the yellow was added years later as a representation of Ethiopia, the only African nation not dominated by colonialism. And so that's our squiggle cookie, the 4th cookie out of this full set. And you can see all of them together. We have our Afro Puff silhouette, our locks, and our afro. Give this cookie set a try and share it with me at Iced Kitchen.